I was born on Cinco de Mayo. I'm a fraternal twin. I've been with my boyfriend Brandon Group since October 16th, 2010, and I'm excited for our future.
I'm just gonna start off by saying, like, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. If you know, you know. And if you don't know, like, I honestly feel bad for you.
If you were on Tumblr in the mid-2010s, chances are you remember the girly aesthetic. This ultra-feminine, hyper-curated vibe peaked around 2014 and slowly faded out by 2018, but not before leaving its dreamy and romantic mark. But how exactly it came to be and what it says about femininity, internet culture, and consumerism is something I'm going to be trying to give a bit of a take on. I'm going to try and break this aesthetic down by identifying and contextualizing its biggest fashion and beauty items and what it all meant in the bigger cultural picture. Without further ado, let's get into it. Background. The way girliness looks has been shaped over centuries. In Western culture, as early as ancient mythology, femininity was regarded as soft, emotional, and beautiful. This translated into clothing through pale colours, delicate fabrics, and flowy silhouettes. But, like anything in clothing, these signals evolve depending on broader cultural values and economic shifts. What we think of as a typical girly aesthetic, things like pink, lace, bows, florals, flowing dresses, started forming as far back as the Baroque and Regency periods, but it truly crystallised in the Victorian era. Advertisements from this era indicate that things like pink, lace, and ribbons were becoming markers of proper girliness. Through the 20th century, girly aesthetics transformed with each decade's shifting cultural and economic factors that influence femininity. From the 1950s bombshells to the 60s mod dolls, from the bimbo aesthetic of the 90s and early 2000s to the McBling era of the mid to late 2000s. By 2014, this lineage had taken a distinctly digital turn with Girly Tumblr, defined by soft pastels, vintage vibes, and nostalgic undertones. It resonated with teens looking for dreamy, hyper-feminine, sweet fashion. But why was it one of the main girly aesthetics of the 2010s? What were the cultural and economic values at play during this time? Well, I'm going to try and propose 3 factors. Firstly, and probably most importantly, is the rise of internet aesthetic culture. Instagram, which exploded in 2014, let teens document their aesthetic tastes like never before. We Heart It and Pinterest, both very popular in the early 2010s, streamlined finding clothing to actually purchasing it, but the star of this era was Tumblr. Launched in 2007, Tumblr became the internet's aesthetic headquarters by the early 2010s. Think of it as a blend of Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram, and WordPress, a fully customizable platform filling the MySpace-shaped hole left in the 2000s. Tumblr encouraged users to find niche communities based on shared interests, and its seamless reblogging features and algorithms allowed for easy searching and reblogging of similar images and aesthetics, leading to a rich ecosystem of many fashion aesthetics, and the platform becoming teenagers' favourite social media website by the mid-2010s. Girly Tumblr was one of its main aesthetics. It rose to prominence during Ariana Grande's 2013 to 2014 Yours Truly era, which was extremely popular with tween and teenage girls. Those who loved Ariana's vintage and girly style found each other in Tumblr communities and evolved their interest to a full-blown aesthetic. This was their happy place, compared to other popular Tumblr aesthetics like hipster, soft grunge, or pastel goth, with their ironic and tomboy edges. Girly aesthetics, such as Girly Tumblr, but also Nymphette, Delicate Sweet, and Pink Parisian, felt sincere and unapologetically hyper-feminine. YouTube also had a role in internet aesthetic culture. The early 2010s saw beauty and lifestyle vloggers explode in popularity. Here, videos like What's in My Bag, makeup tutorials, fashion hauls, and morning routines gave girly fashion a relatable, personal touch. And then you had creators like Freddie My Love and Gabby DiMartino, who showcased hyper-feminine looks through vlogs, hauls, and tutorials, which helped spread the girly aesthetic to millions. The second factor I'm going to propose is fast fashion. This business model of mass-producing trendy styles quickly and cheaply wasn't new, but it skyrocketed in the 2010s. With many people still recovering from the 2007 recession, affordable clothing was still essential. But fast fashion's true power came from syncing perfectly with internet culture. Tumblr's constant churn of trends and YouTube's glamorization of consumerism created a demand for quick, cheap fashion cycles, and fast fashion could deliver. It became the engine that kept online aesthetics alive and evolving. The third factor I'm going to suggest is the rise of self-care culture. The 2010s were the wellness decade. Yoga, meditation, face masks, juice cleansers, $80 candles. Statistics indicate the global wellness industry shot up by the trillions during this decade, and millennials got roasted for making it their entire personality. But underneath the parodies was this idea that empowerment came from taking care of yourself, which a lot of the time meant buying stuff to do it. Skincare hauls on YouTube, bath products on Tumblr, endless amounts of makeup and vanities, all framed as essential for self-care rituals. Wrapping it all up, I'm basically suggesting that the cultural and economic factors that gave rise to 2014 Girly Tumblr are self-care consumption habits, aesthetic internet culture, and fast fashion's endless supply chain. In my opinion, these were the perfect conditions for a hyper-feminine, hyper-consumerist, and endlessly shareable aesthetic to spread. Now that we've got a theory about why it happened, let's take a look at what it actually looked like. Clothes. Before we get into specific items, as always, let's break down the aesthetic's main influences to deepen our understanding. At its core, this aesthetic was deeply vintage inspired, particularly by the 1950s. These styles trace back to Christian Dior's revolutionary 1947 New Look. After years of wartime fabric rations resulting in simple and unshapely silhouettes, Dior's New Look was experimental, fun, and aimed to show off the female body. Think cinched waists, full skirts, and hourglass figures. By the 50s, this look was mainstream and became particularly associated with femininity. Think housewives, bombshells, pin-up girls, and so on. Ariana Grande embraced this vibe during her Yours Truly era to complement the 50s doo-wop sounds in the record. The 50s fashion influence in the aesthetic was also filtered in via twee fashion, a popular 2010 style built around vintage cuts and cute femininity, so it was a pretty good fit for Girly Tumblr. Girly Tumblr was also just heavily tapped into broader 2010s trends, particularly the decade's revival of both 50s and 80s styles. I've mentioned this many times before, but basically trends tend to revive themselves in 20 to 30 year cycles. So the 90s took a lot of inspiration from the 60s, the 2000s took a lot of inspiration from the 70s, and then naturally the 2010s became heavily inspired by the 80s, which thanks to the cycle rule was itself inspired by 40s and 50s styles. So simple, so perfect. Another big 2010s trend Girly Tumblr loved was athleisure. Workout wear became everyday fashion thanks to a mix of the 2010s reviving 80s athleisure, luxury designer collaborations with athletic brands, the rise of high-end athletic brands like Lululemon and Supreme, and celebrity adoption of the trend. Just some I can think of are Ariana Grande's oversized sweatshirts, Beyoncé's designer gym fits, or Rihanna's Puma collab. Athleisure also went perfectly alongside self-care culture. Wellness, skincare, and cozy treat-yourself aesthetics all looked great in athleisure, and on Tumblr and Instagram, and all of these things filtered into Girly Tumblr. Finally, we need to talk about the basic girl aesthetic. In the early 2010s, basic was used to mock mostly white, middle-class girls for liking mainstream trends like Starbucks, Ugg boots, pumpkin spice, and Instagram filters. Despite being culturally ridiculed, the basic girl aesthetic overlapped heavily with Girly Tumblr. So if I zoom out, I kind of see the influences of the Girly Tumblr aesthetic as a mix of mid-century femininity, big 2010s trends, particularly 80s throwbacks and athleisure, and 2010s aesthetics like twee and basic girl. Okay, now let's take a look at the specific items. First up, Peter Pan collars, giving that soft, sweet, whimsical vibe. Named after a 1905 Broadway Peter Pan costume, the style gained widespread popularity in children's fashion from the 1920s, becoming permanently associated with youthfulness and innocence. but it also had moments in the 50s, 60s, and the 80s. It then found a new place in the twee boom of the 2010s, and from there trickled over to mainstream trends and definitely into girly Tumblr. Peter Pan collars became so trendy in the 2010s that collar-shaped necklaces even became their own accessory. Big, woolen or fuzzy sweatshirts made a feature, playing into the cozy, self-care vibe, and then peplum tops. The name comes from the Greek word peplos, meaning tunic, but the silhouette that we know mostly emerged in the 1800s, when jackets flared dramatically at the hips to make the waist look smaller and emphasise bustle-backed skirts. Dior gave it new life in his 1947 new looks, using stiff fabrics to sculpt dramatic hourglass shapes, creating revolutionary looks with the iconic bar suit that brought a joie de vivre back to fashion after the wars. This made peplums a symbol of extravagance after years of fabric rationing. The style was also associated with glamour and Hollywood too around this time, thanks to starlets like Joan Crawford and this iconic peplum suit by Lauren Bacall in her first movie To Have and Have Not in 1944. Peplums then came roaring back in the 80s with designers like Thierry Mugler, Oscar de la Renta, and Karl Lagerfeld, and soon became a staple of the decade, particularly in the boom of 80s power suit dressing. As the 2010s began reviving the 80s, peplums were first seen, of course, on the runways. Think Dior, Givenchy, and Jill Sander. But the newly stratospheric world of fast fashion made for many, many imitations. And soon, peplum tops were everywhere, from runways to clearance bins. Not ones to shy away from mainstream trends or basic girl trends, girly Tumblr was there and loving them. Then we have the A-line silhouette. Tight at the hips, puffed out at the waist, in both skirts and dresses. Dior coined the term A-line with his collection in 1955, but it was Yves Saint Laurent who later perfected it for Dior in 1958 with his flowy trapeze dresses that were a lot easier to move in. The style trickled down to 50s and 60s fashion, and twee fashion revived the silhouette in the 2010s, and all of these references made it effortlessly fit girly Tumblr. Carrying on the A-line silhouette is the skater skirt, an absolutely iconic 2010s item. Though it's often linked to 80s skating costumes, and they definitely became a very popular and high fashion item in the 80s, its DNA lies in 50s poodle skirts, beloved by teenagers, being easier to dance in than 30s and 40s pencil skirts. High-waisted skater skirts appeared on runways in 2012 and were absolutely everywhere by 2014. As the decade had an obsession with post-recession, minimal, stretchy basics, fueled by brands like American Apparel, which helped turn skater skirts into a cultural moment, and one girly Tumblr girls were not immune from. There were also some really popular underwear as outerwear items in this aesthetic, particularly bustiers. Originating in 16th century corsetry, they found new life in the 1950s glamorous pin-up wear, but really went mainstream in the 80s thanks to many of Madonna's iconic looks in her Like a Virgin era. As the 2010s started to do 80s, they brought the bustier back in a major way. And so the girly Tumblr aesthetic loved it. Then there were pyjamas, particularly silk pyjamas, or the Victoria's Secret pink striped pyjamas. Silk pyjamas originated in South and Central Asia, but were adapted by British colonists in the 18th and 19th century, and became fashionable loungewear for women in the 20s, thanks to designers like Paul Poiret, loved by icons like Coco Chanel, Jean Harlow, and Marlene Dietrich. They soon developed a luxe reputation. In the girly Tumblr world, they kind of symbolise both vintage glamour and self-care. And then finally, you had the very big influence of the 2010s athleisure trend, linking the aesthetic to self-care and basic girl culture. This manifested in many black and grey leggings, sweatpants and hoodies, particularly from Victoria's Secret pink, where you also had this cut-off sweatshirt, which was a massive reference to the 80s, seen in the 1983 film Flashdance, which then became an iconic garment in 80s athleisure wear. Accessories. Arguably the most iconic accessory for this aesthetic was Ugg boots. I've covered them before in the McBling video. Essentially, they were first designed in the 60s in Australia as post-surf footwear. They then became popular in the Californian surf scene in the 70s and exploded globally in the 2000s, after being embraced by the 2000s McBling it girls. In the early 2010s, they were also a massive component of the basic girl look. Girly Tumblr was particularly known for loving the pink cloud Uggs, or Uggs with glitters and bows. Stilettos were also really popular in this aesthetic. They were first engineered in the 50s because aerospace materials post-World War II had made it possible to design a shoe like that. Named after a slim Italian dagger, they quickly became a weapon of seduction when popularised by the bombshells of the era. They also became associated with boss dressing in the 80s, and these 50s and 80s vintage references made it perfect for Girly Tumblr. Ballet flats also had their moment in the aesthetic. Though they originated in the 16th century ballet courts, their modern version came in 1956, when Brigitte Bardot asked Rose Repetto to create a chic version of the ballet slipper. The style was then adopted by 50s icons and became a staple of the decade, before they returned in the 80s, seen a lot on Princess Diana. In the late 2000s and into the early 2010s, they came back in a major way, seen as a staple of twee fashion. So with all of these references, their place in the aesthetic was inevitable. Other accessories included fuzzy socks, adding to the coziness of the aesthetic, knee-high socks in the later part of the aesthetic, which was a recreation of a popular 60s and 90s style, and occasional inclusions of pearl jewellery, which is often a symbol of aristocracy and vintage glamour, and were particularly popular in the 50s, of course. Flap bags were also a big part of the aesthetic. A lot of the time it seemed like they were trying to emulate the same style and energy as the Chanel 255 flap bag. Released in 1955, it was radical at the time, featuring a quilted exterior inspired by equestrian jackets, a burgundy lining reflecting Chanel's convent school uniform, and a chain strap that allowed women to carry the bag hands-free, which was a pretty novel concept at the time. The original design included the Mademoiselle lock, named because Chanel never married. Then in 1983, Karl Lagerfeld reimagined the bag, adding the iconic interlocking CC turn lock and introducing various materials and colours, further cementing its status as a fashion staple. Both eras of the bag, 50s and 80s, lived on through the styles of the flap bags of the Girly Tumblr era, although in much cheaper brands. Other bags included leather totes and clutches from classic preppy and twee brands like Ted Baker, Kate Spade, and Celine. But probably the most important accessory of the aesthetic was shopping bags. Pink striped Victoria's Secret bags, sleek Chanel ones, or another designer logo if you were lucky. They weren't just packaging, they were props, status symbols, aesthetic statements that you scattered all over your Girly Tumblr blogs, aligning you with the same interests and tastes as your fellow Girly Tumblr users. Hair and beauty. Hair was long, styled, and unmistakably feminine, mostly worn in either voluminous waves, high ponytails with trailing lengths, or half-up, half-down styles. These looks drew heavily from Ariana Grande's Yours Truly era, which in itself was a big reference to 50s and 60s bombshell hair, like that of Brigitte Bardot. Hair accessories were very necessary though. These included things like headbands, cat ears, thanks to Ariana Grande again, and flower crowns, thanks to broader 2010s boho trends. But no hair accessory was more important to the aesthetic than bows. Once a symbol of aristocratic flair for all genders, they became tied to girlhood, softness, femininity, and innocence during the Victorian era, which carried all the way through the 20th century and into the 2014 Girly Tumblr, where they were an essential part of the aesthetic. Makeup stayed light but deliberate. 2010 staples like contouring, bold brows, that all featured, but without veering into full glam. Occasionally you'd see the iconic twee cat eyeliner, which nodded to retro 50s and 60s beauty trends. But really, it was the products that mattered the most. Photos of hauls of girly, branded beauty products flooded Girly Tumblr dashboards. Think Too Faced eyeshadow palettes and their Sweethearts and Love Flush blushes, Essie's nail polishes, Victoria's Secret lip glosses, Maybelline baby products, which launched in the early 2010s to much hype, or EOS lip balms, which became a pop culture sensation in the early 2010s, thanks to their unique shape, their pastel packaging, and a lot of celebrity and beauty blogger endorsement. Body sprays, lotions, and washes were very big, particularly if they were from brands like Victoria's Secret, Soap and Glory, Oh So Heavenly, Philosophy, Bath and Body Works, or I Love, and teen-loved fragrances like Ariana Grande's Ari, Victoria's Secret, Juicy Couture, or Marc Jacobs Daisy all completed the vanity. These were not all of them by any means, but the point of it is lots and lots of pictures of beauty products and their associated brands were aesthetic props and became visually connected to activities associated with self-care, like baths, skincare, or makeup routines. Other visual cues. So let's talk first about the colour palette. It was essentially desaturated pinks and pastels, with features of mint green, which was having a real moment with basic girl millennial culture in the early to mid 2010s during that live, love, laugh era. Then we have brands. Classic 2010s mainstream brands like Brandy Melville, Abercrombie & Fitch, Forever 21, PacSun, Hollister, Charlotte Russe, Juicy Couture, and American Eagle were favourites in the girly Tumblr scene. Luxury fashion houses were also loved by the aesthetic, but as these were mostly out of teenage girls' price ranges, even just references to these brands in homemade crafts were heavily featured in YouTube craft videos and then scattered across girly Tumblr bedroom pictures. But undeniably the most iconic brand of the aesthetic was Victoria's Secret. Founded in 1977 to make lingerie shopping more comfortable for men, by the late 90s it had become one of the most iconic brands of the century. This was largely due to the introduction of the Victoria's Secret Angels, who became global stars, and the launch of the ultra-glamorous fashion show in 1995, which would go on in its later years to turn lingerie into a spectacle of wings, costumes, glitter, celebrity performances, and eventually Super Bowl level TV ratings. Victoria's Secret had teenage girls in a chokehold too, partly because shopping there in the 2010s felt like going to a nightclub, but mostly because of Victoria's Secret Pink. Launched in 2002, the line was designed to target teens and college girls, offering hoodies, sweatpants, branded underwear, and it completely took off, becoming one of the most profitable lines of the business, and one of the most watched segments of the Victoria's Secret show in the 2000s. Overall, the hyper-femininity, fun, and glamour of Victoria's Secret, and its youthful appeal in the pink line, was perfect for the girly Tumblr aesthetic, who soon turned pink clothing, that iconic silky pink robe, and more broadly Victoria's Secret iconic pink stripe branding, into one of its most reblogged motifs. Now let's move on to interiors. In the age of YouTube vlogger room tours and Pinterest inspiration boards, interior in the girly Tumblr aesthetic was just as important as the clothing. Interiors were dreamy pink and white spaces blending baroque, shabby chic, and basic girl 2010s trends. These included white vanities cluttered with beauty products, Kath Kidston's nostalgic floral prints for a vintage effect that looked really good on Tumblr blogs, princess beds, fairy lights, fluffy blankets, pattern pillows, references to girly Tumblr icons like Ariana Grande, Victoria's Secret models, or Audrey Hepburn, chandeliers, and Yankee candles. So many Yankee candles. There was this kind of nostalgic nature to these rooms, reminiscent of dollhouses, or how you might have fantasized your room might look when you got older. And the focus on coziness, comfortable beds, and candles had a big self-care vibe to it. We also need to talk about food in the aesthetic. Clothing featuring food, or food pics themselves, were everywhere on girly Tumblr, mostly focusing on sweet food, think cupcakes, cookies, marshmallow-topped hot chocolates, and macaroons, adding to the childlike nostalgia of the aesthetic. Starbucks pictures, particularly the pink drink, were also so essential, aligning the aesthetic again with basic girl culture. Remember, this aesthetic was happening alongside the hipster subculture, or the decade where people were making having good taste in coffee their entire personality. Posting Starbucks pictures was an affront to that, and honestly, let's celebrate that. Aside from eating food, the aesthetic also featured a number of other self-care activity pictures like baths and journaling, really precursing the that girl era of the 2020s. And lastly, there was the technology of girly Tumblr. Childlike iPhone cases, think teddy bears, thanks to Ariana Grande's love of teddy bears, were really popular. And paired with models like the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 5 or the 2016 Rose Gold edition, which went so very well with the aesthetic. Tumblr girls often shared cozy mirror selfies with their phones, and many pictures of laptops streaming girly shows like Pretty Little Liars or The Kardashians or old-timey movies, reinforcing the aesthetic's comfort and self-care themes. Early Instagram filters played a key role too, especially the use of dreamy, desaturated filters like Amaro, Valencia, or Aiden. These filters gave the aesthetic its nostalgic, soft, and delicate mood, and for that reason they might actually be one of the most important aspects of this aesthetic. The decline. The 2014 girly Tumblr aesthetic started to fade around 2017-2018. Tumblr was already losing steam around this time, and its 2018 adult content ban only sped things up. Users began migrating to platforms like TikTok, where fast-paced, flashy videos started shaping their own micro-trends, ones that thrived on immediacy and virality. A fair contrast to Tumblr's slow, dreamy, hyper-curated aesthetic. Around this time, fashion started to change too. The 80s inspired looks that had dominated most of the decade gave way to 90s streetwear styles, and therefore twee and 50s inspired styles also fell out of favour. Ariana Grande herself, the key inspiration for girly Tumblr, moved into a more casual, comfy streetwear style by this time, which was a dead giveaway that the aesthetic was getting tired. Also, fast fashion brands lost power in the market as their business models and environmental impact faced more scrutiny, and Victoria's Secret were called out for outdated beauty ideals in markets that were now focusing a lot on body inclusivity. So much so that their sales significantly decreased and they stopped their iconic fashion show for a while after 2018. Basically, the building blocks of the aesthetic were just falling apart. So I always like to point out the flaws in an aesthetic to try and avoid romanticizing it, and I know this one is easy to romanticize. It's dreamy, delicate, it was designed to be nostalgic even when it was happening. But just because something looks sweet doesn't mean it's completely unproblematic. One major critique of this aesthetic is its glaring lack of diversity. Like many popular 2010s aesthetics, it skews overwhelmingly white. Attention made more striking because it's so tied to femininity and girliness. This is something I pointed out in the twee video as well. It might reflect a broader pattern in Western culture where femininity is more quickly associated with white, middle-class, heteronormative girls. Then you had the consumerism equals self-care aspect of this aesthetic. I don't know if you guys felt this as well during this era, but these huge hauls, these pictures of products, they seem to be promoting the idea that buying more of these products makes you more empowered because the more you buy, the more dedicated you are to self-care and girly vibes. And I guess the issue that I have here is how much of the self-care is focused on buying things rather than actually looking after yourself. I don't know the answer to that, but I do think all this stuff is really interesting to think about as we notice the evolution of the 2014 girly Tumblr to TikTok aesthetics. Things like coquette, soft girl, Barbiecore, and all these other girly self-care videos that present huge hauls of beauty products and clothes. And all of these aesthetics are still mostly lacking diversity. It would be nice to say that we've moved past the era of fast fashion, overconsumption, and underrepresentation, but I think we all know that for the most part it's probably gotten worse. But I feel like I have to say it is absolutely not just feminine, girly aesthetics alone that have these issues. In fact, you could say the same thing about almost any aesthetic I've covered on this channel. So please don't just come for the girls after watching this video. All of this isn't to say that the aesthetic was only problematic and nothing else. There is nothing wrong with liking soft, delicate, and romantic fashion aesthetics. And perhaps the escapism that the aesthetic offered does have some place. Its dreamy, vintage, nostalgic, romantic energy allows us to retreat to the warmth of girlhood, when we were just consumers of culture and not critics of it. And maybe we all need that escape every now and then. Anyway, I could go on and on about this aesthetic. That's how interesting I find it. But I'm going to leave it there, and I'd love to hear from you guys what you think about it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.